Hi everyone. So in this video, we're looking at why do we industrialize there, or where we do. This is again part of Unit 7, the Industrial and Economic Development Patterns and Processes, and this is part 2 of this video. So again, we're looking at topics 1.5, 6.1, 6.6, and 6.7, but it really all ties into Unit 7. Okay. Our tidbit of the day is that despite a significant increase to women in the workforce in recent decades, only about half of working age women participate in the paid workforce. And this is compared to 3/4 of working age men. This is largely due to continuing discriminatory practices, societal standards, and cultural norms. If women played an equal role in the workforce to men, the global annual GDP would increase by $28 trillion. All right, so we have the same learning objectives we did last time, and again, it looks like a whole lot, but honestly, we've already gone over most of these way back, or all of these in previous topics, and this is really just tying them together. So explain how major geographic concepts illustrate spatial relationships, the processes that initiate and drive urbanization and suburbanization, how low, medium, and high density housing characteristics represent different patterns of residential land use, explain how a city's infrastructure relates to the local politics, society, and environment. And then we are looking at concepts of nature and society, including sustainability, natural resources, and land use. Site and situation influence the origin, function, and growth of cities. Changes in transportation and communication, population growth, migration, economic development, and government policies influence urbanization. Residential buildings and patterns of land use reflect the shape of the city's culture, technological capabilities, and cycles of development and infilling. And the location and quality of a city's infrastructure directly affects its spatial patterns of economic and social development. And I know that's a lot, but again, we've already gone over it. Okay, so just hitting what we looked at in the last video really quickly. Situation, again, is the location of a place relative to other places. Its characteristics include that it uses other places to describe location, and it is the most important factor on growth potential. Examples for Seattle, Washington in this case include that it is located 20 miles north of Tacoma and that it's near Issaquah, and non-examples would be those site examples we talked about before, that it has 4 seasons, temperate climate, and a hilly area. These are not situation, these are site. Okay, so looking again at the locational triangle, and remember that this is related to Weber's least cost theory. If one input is more bulk reducing than the other, the factory will be pulled toward that more bulk reducing input. It is pulled toward the market if it's bulk gaining. Because again, remember that has to do with transportation costs. Where is it heaviest? Because we're going to have it in the factory closest to where it's heaviest, because transportation to the final step, to whatever the next step is the most expensive aspect that's going into this, and it's most expensive when it's heavier. Okay, so we looked at situation factors before, and today we're looking at site factors. So site factors include industrial location, factors related to the cost of factors of production inside a plant. That's a really confusing sentence, but it's the way that the industrial location factors are connected, the way that they we either do more of it or less of it depending on the cost. So it's the cost of production inside the plant, which side is going to be more expensive. And this could be more significant than situational factors. So we think about it situation a lot, but site sometimes can be way more important. So the biggest and most important thing is labor, and this is the workers. Price and skill level are especially important for more labor-intensive industries that require a whole lot of workers. Wages are the highest percent, or a high percent of the expenses. In LDCs, we have very, very cheap labor, and that is why we outsource. Remember, outsourcing is a vocab term. We send that work somewhere else. We send it overseas to LDCs because they are going to work cheaper than, say, laborers in the United States. And then we have something called the multiplier effect. impact, and this is the potential of jobs to produce additional jobs. So new factory workers will spend more money in their communities. Remember the basic and non-basic industry draw. So when you build a new basic industry, those people who work there and their families are going to spend money in non-basic industries. So the fun stuff, the community stuff, rather than the imports rather than the exports of the basic industry. And this also works in reverse. So the more non-basic industry we have, the more of that extra stuff, the more likely we are to draw in the basic industries, those new factories and such. Capital is also going to be an extremely important site factor. Capital is money to invest, money that you have ready to go that we can put into something, and this is going to vary from place to place. And finally, land. So the price of land, the access to transportation, all of these costs vary. And therefore, labor-intensive versus high-wage industries versus capital-intensive industries are really the big things that we're looking at, and which one is going to cost the most, which one is going to cost the least, and that's how we determine where to put our factories, talking about site factors. Okay, so we have a graph here of hourly wages in US dollars, and this is for places all over the United States, all over the world, including the United States, but also many, many other countries. So purple is developed countries, green is developing countries. Notice how significant the difference is when we look at developed versus developing. And then in the developing, in our more developed places, like our stage 3 or higher, stage 3 places like Russia, Brazil, and Mexico, these wages typically are much higher than, say, China or India. Both of these often are looked at still as stage 3, but not quite on the far end like these ones are. And there's typically a lot more income disparity between the wealthy and the poor in China and India than we might see in other places. But it's gonna not make a whole lot of sense to put low-skill laborers in these countries, to have people working low-skill jobs here when it would be more cost-efficient to have them here. So the average hourly manufacturing wages in 14 of the 15 largest industrial countries, what we're looking at here, are going to be really significantly different. So a difference between paying workers $2 per hour and $35 per hour can be an absolutely influential site factor for the location of industries. If you need to employ 100 people, paying 100 people $35 an hour versus paying 100 people $2 an hour is going to be an absolutely astronomical difference. And manufacturer workers are going to make a lot more money in MDCs, so more producers are going to choose LDCs for their factory locations. It makes the most business sense. Okay, looking at capital, and again, remember that this is money to invest. The biggest factor in clustering high-tech industries in Silicon Valley is the availability of capital and willing investors and loaning institutions. 1/4 of all US capital, like 1 in every $4 that is spent in investing money in businesses, is spent in Silicon Valley, even though 2/3 of those businesses fail. It's a very high risk investment, but it's a very high reward if it's successful. So look at some of the companies. We have HP, we have Apple, eBay, Facebook, Adobe, Cisco, Intel, AMD, Google. All of these are incredibly profitable. So a couple of words I want you to think about with this. The first one is agglomeration. And we talked about that before. So it's essentially having those businesses that are related to each other close together because they're going to benefit each other. They're going to share transportation costs, all of that good stuff. And in Silicon Valley in particular, we want to look at it in a couple of ways. So one term here is technopole, and this is the agglomeration of info-based industry and high-tech manufacturing that benefit from shared space. So it's an agglomeration that's really particular to high-tech and information-based industry. And a growth pull is the concentration of high-value economic development that attracts even more economic development. Again, still kind of the same concept that we're looking at right here in Silicon Valley. The more of these things we have, the more of them we're going to attract. Okay. So looking at our last site factor, land. Early factories found in cities offered proximity to markets, labor, capital, and rail, so transportation. Cities lacked an abundance of land, however. So in a city, if you're going to keep growing, it's just going to get absolutely enormous. And realistically, by the time you get way far out, you're just making new cities. Early factories were also often multi-level to compensate, so literally multiple stories, because there's only so big that you can make them horizontally. You can only take up so much of a footprint. So building up made more sense in that case, because there's way more room to build up. Literally, the sky's the limit. Modern factories, however, are single story, and this is going to make them much more efficient. You don't have to go up through things. You can make one level. You might often see the little carts that drive around if it's a really big facility. That typically is going to be a lot more efficient, especially if you're building things that are really heavy, that are delicate and difficult to move, rather than having to go up and down different stories just on the one floor. And modern factories are also often located in suburban and rural areas, which is going to be much, much cheaper than trying to build them in cities. Remember the bid rent curve. The closer we are to the city center, the CBD, the more expensive the land is, and the less of it there is available, which is what's going to drive the cost so high, or a large part of it. The farther we can get away from it, the cheaper the land is going to be. Truck transportation also has encouraged the development of industrial parks along major highways and lines of transportation. One of the things we want to think about with this concept especially is the idea of edge cities. So with truck transportation, with cars, with all of these highways and things that go along with it, we can put stuff farther out. And so instead of having the industry well within the city, now we can drive to it. We can have it away from housing. We can have a whole industrial park, which is really just an area where we have a whole bunch of factories connected together, often like an agglomeration, and nobody lives there because that's not what it's for. The people who work there are the people who work in those factories or the headquarters or whatever's close by. All right. So let's apply some of these site factors. First off, we're going to look at clothing. Textiles and apparel require low skill and low cost labor. We make lots and lots of clothes all the time. We all have a whole lot of them, or most of us have a whole lot of them. And this is often through a concept that we refer to as fast fashion. So textile and apparel require, 6% of world manufacturing, So 6% of world manufacturing is textile and apparel, but 14% of manufacturing employment is in the textile industry. So they're disproportionately large in the number of the workers they employ. This means that it is incredibly labor intensive. The percent of the world's women employed in the textile industry is even higher than that 14%. So the numbers of men are going to be quite low. The numbers of women are going to be quite high. So one of the big things that really factors into the labor intensiveness here is the spinning of yarn. We know that largely what we make clothing out of is cotton or man-made synthetic materials. But when we make this stuff, or when we grow this stuff, after collecting, we have to spin it. We have to make yarn, which is essentially how we make thread. And that's super, super labor intensive. It takes a lot of effort for a fairly small reward. Weaving, so the actual making of the fabric, is also very labor intensive. And this is going to help to offset the cost of transportation. So we put the money here so we put the money in transportation and save the money here, meaning that we're more likely to make that clothing overseas. We're more likely to put it somewhere where we have that really, really cheap cost, because we save so much money because the wages are really low that we can afford to ship it. The majority of assembly is in LDCs for this reason. MDCs have a larger role due to most consumers in MDCs. And this, again, is used to reduce transportation costs. So when we see this stuff happening in MDCs, it's because most of the consumers are there. All right, so that is it. Told you this part was going to be pretty short. And again, I know that's pretty wordy, but basically it's saying that where we put stuff is relevant with policies, it's relevant with where people are, it's relevant with the costs of stuff, it's relevant with environmental impact, it's relevant with economic development. All of these things are related to each other. So go back, rewatch anything that you missed. Make sure you check out those maps and charts. Really important that you get really familiar and comfortable with reading them. Let me know if you have any questions. Make sure you're doing your reading. Make sure you're working on your critical thinking and review. And have a great day. Bye.